Faces of Death. Yes, it is a very controversial series, but a series that has its place in horror nonetheless. And it is a series that has gained a cult following and a big following within Mondo cinema, me being a fan of it as well. And recently there has been some news about a remake being made, or a reimagining by the way they said it. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's get into it. Now, about a year ago, they announced that they were going to be remaking or reimagining the Face of Death series with a brand new film directed and written by the people who wrote and directed Cam, and also being produced and released by Legendary Films. There's been a few articles, but one in particular by Bloody Disgusting was released, just going over the whole entire aspect of what the reimagining is going to be, who is going to be in it, and how it's going to kind of tie into the original series. Now, this was very divisive. You know, people like me who are true fans of the originals wasn't so happy about this, but there were some people who maybe are more casual horror fans that don't know much about the Faces of Death series that were like, okay, this is cool, they're bringing it into a new age and gonna try to update it. Now, if you don't know what Faces of Death is, let me explain it real quick for you. Faces of Death is a 1978 Mondo horror film series. And the one that we're talking about right now is the very first one, so just Faces of Death. Written and directed by John Allen Schwartz. Now, like I said, it is a Mondo film, so we'll get into that a few minutes later about what Mondo cinema is, but it is centered around a pathologist named Francis B. Gross, which, let me just say, that is like the best name in like horror, like Francis B. Gross, that's hilarious. And the main premise is pretty much just him showing clips of different versions of death, some being real, some being fake. Now, from what I believe or what I know of the movie, it is about 65% real, 45% fake, where the fake scenes are just sort of reenacted with prosthetic makeup, and the real stuff coming from news clips, archive footage, and just stuff like that. They didn't really go out on their own. These are just clips that involved death in some way that they were able to obtain and put into the film. And the point of all of this was for Francis B. Gross, the pathologist, to show you the different faces of death, or the different types of way that you can die, the violence and everything that comes across with that. And that's where it brings us into what is Mondo cinema. I'm a big fan of Mondo cinema. It is not for everybody, and I will tell you before we go over what Mondo is, if you have a weak stomach, if you're easily offended, if it's something where you get kind of scared and disturbed by really basic horror movies, then Mondo probably is not for you. So just take that into account before I get into this. So let's get into what Mondo is. Mondo is a subgenre of the exploitation genre of films and the documentary genre of films. Some have coined it mockumentary, or some have coined it shockumentary, because not every single Mondo movie is fully mockumentary. It definitely has some real aspects to it. There are a lot of Mondo films that are based around real things. The majority of them, I would say. So I feel like shockumentary is the best way to describe what Mondo is. And what these shockumentaries hit on are sensationalized topics from around the world that have to do with taboo topics. It started in the 60s with movies like Mondo Cane, which is one of my favorite Mondo films, and then with Africa Audio and Women of the World following up. Then it has stemmed off throughout the years into series like Faces of Death, Traces of Death, Banned from Television, and Faces of Gore. All the way up to present day, where Mondo Shock 2 was actually just released in 2021, including a bunch of other ones that have been released since then. I'm not going to go into those. I really don't want you guys looking those up. Mainly now they're just kind of compilations put together into a underground homemade film. Nothing that you can't see from stuff from like Live Links or Reddit subs. You know, just your basic gore videos. So that's essentially what Mondo is. Mondo can be a range of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be gory. It can be taboo cultures from across the world and certain things that they do. And I guess it can kind of be like sort of jackassy CKY type stuff too. I know that like bum fights, if you guys know what that is. If you don't look it up. Please don't. It's terrible. But I think like bum fights and stuff like that is considered Mondo. Pretty much anything that puts together a sort of shockumentary clip style movie with shocking content and taboos from across the world. Now, like I said before, this movie that is going to be coming out isn't going to be that. You know, this is going to be put out by Legendary Films with actual people in it, and there is no way that they're going to actually make this Faces of Death. Now, the article says this is written and directed by Issa Mazi and Danielle Goldhaber, the creators of Cam. Cam is a 2008 psychological thriller about a cam girl who's replaced by a replica of herself. It has a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 71% on Metacritic, but to be honest, it's sort of just your run-of-the-mill kind of unfriended type horror movie. I really don't know why or how it got as good of reviews that it did, because honestly, it's a really bad movie. It kind of just feels like one of those movies that you would find on like the back burner of a free streaming service, to be honest. It's not very good, and it just made me really bummed out that they're doing this movie. And like I said, it's going to be released by Legendary Films, who's released movies like Trick or Treat, As Above, So Below, Krampus, and one of the worst movies I've ever seen, which is the Netflix Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And here's where we get into the big part of the article describing who's going to be in the movie and what the movie is going to be about. Now, the main character of this new reimagining is going to be a girl who her job is to sort of like be a YouTube moderator. I don't believe it's YouTube, but it's pretty much YouTube. And it's her job to kind of go through and find channels that need to be taken down. And while she is doing that, she ends up coming across a channel that is supposed to reenact, I guess, the original scenes from Faces of Death. Now, this is kind of giving off like a Blair Witch 2 vibe, but like not in a good way, like not in the cheesy 2000s way, but more of like, what the hell are you doing? And this main protagonist is going to be played by Barbie Farah. You may know her as Kat from Euphoria. You know, that A24 HBO TV show about teenagers just doing stuff. Yeah, it's okay. Also starring Darcy Montgomery, you know, that dude from Stranger Things. Because, you know, we all have to have as much Stranger Things shoved in our face as possible. Also, Josie Tota from Saved by the Bell. And some Charlie girl who apparently is some singer that also sang for Euphoria or something. You see a trend going here, right? Let's get cool, edgy teenagers to play in our movies. Like, there's something that's just giving the vibe off to me that this is just like some cash grab where they're trying to throw the name of Faces of Death on it and be like, oh yeah, let's try to get these edgy teenagers to like Faces of Death. I know, I sound like a broken record. I sound like I'm gatekeeping, and honestly, I kind of am. I know that sounds really crappy to say, but Faces of Death has a place in horror, and it has a place in cinema history as being this big cult thing. And when you take that, and you take what the series was, and if you talk to an actual fan like me, there will be people, sure, that are fans that are going to be like, yeah, I'll go see it, whatever. And if it's bad, who cares? But for me, I feel like the preservation of Mondo and underground cinema like that is important. You know, you don't want to see your favorite movies get turned into something they're not, and this is exactly what is happening. Legendary Films is taking this film and they're making it into like this modern day sort of cookie cutter feeling horror movie when that's not what Faces of Death was. You know, they completely abandoned the Mondo format, the shockumentary format, the real clips with the fake clips. It feels bad to me, and it feels gross. It feels like a slap in the face. And speaking of gross, completely abandoning Francis B. Gross as the main, like, focus of this movie is really bad too. I'm gonna rant a lot for like the next 4 minutes about this, so if you want to go ahead and skip to the end and we'll get to pretty much my main thought on this whole entire thing. But for the next 4 minutes, I'm pretty much just going to be, yeah, just complaining. So I know you're asking yourself, why does a movie with real death mean so much to me? And that's a great question. You know, definitely a lot of people don't want to watch stuff like that, and they don't want to watch gore comps and stuff like that. You know, stuff like MD Pope, and I think I've said too much already. Let's move on. For me personally, it's not about the content of the film. It's about what the film stands for. And Mondo film is all about like the reality of things. And that's what I like. You know, I don't want something that is just going to brush over. Yeah, it's fun to watch movies sometimes and forget about the real world. But for me personally, I feel like showing real life stuff or showing simulated real life stuff is depicting the real violence, the real trauma that people go through, and that's what I respect about it. And obviously a new movie like this can't come out and have real deaths in it. That's totally understandable. But that does not mean that you can just switch up the entire movie entirely. And if you do, that just makes me feel like you're cash grabbing, you're throwing the name on it, and just giving a big middle finger to all of us fans of the series. You didn't have to have it centered around a girl. You could have it centered around Frances B. Gross. Now, apparently, this girl has some traumas that's going to get pulled into it, so you're trying to give a backstory to Faces of Death when the backstory was just Frances B. Gross wanting to show you how people die. So right then and there, you lost me, because I don't want to go and have this elaborate backstory and feel bad for somebody. Like, no, like I want to watch a Mondo movie. And again, like I said, apparently she comes across a YouTube channel where they're reenacting the kills. There's not really any kills in Faces of Death. Faces of Death is a compilation of fake and real clips of stuff like accidents, of people taking their own lives, of pretty much anything other than just somebody being killed. Like, yes, there are some things in the movie which would constitute as a killing, but it's far between. There is some animal violence, which most of is fake, and I'm just confused about where they're getting at that you're gonna be able to just recreate these clips in some way that's going to be like, oh, these people were bad people. Like, that doesn't make any sense because that's not what the movie was. I don't know. It's just really confusing to me. And I felt like I needed to get it out there because not a lot of people are talking about it. And you kind of get criticized for talking about it. I've tried to talk about it online before, and I've gotten either from people who are also fans of the series being like, who cares? The originals are still there. You can still watch the originals, whatever. And then I got the other side of it where it's like, I don't like the originals, but this sounds really cool, and you sound stupid and mean for trying to gatekeep it. There's just like no in between, and I feel like as a fan of Faces of Death, it's really hard to judge like how you can go about this because I don't want it to be made at all. If it was my choice, this would get shut down right now and never be made. Unfortunately, that's not an option. So I guess what it comes down to is I'm going to see it when it comes out. I really don't want to, but I'm going to see it when it comes out just so I can come out of it and kind of be validated on the fact that this movie should have never been made. I stand by my statement that I believe this is just a huge cash grab. These people don't care about Faces of Death. Legendary Films don't care about Faces of Death. The writers and directors don't care about Faces of Death, or if they do, then they don't care about the fans of Faces of Death. I believe that this is just a marketing ploy to throw the name of Faces of Death on there. Hope that some OG fans come out to see it. Hope that it spurs enough TikTok clout of, don't go see this movie, it's so terrifying. You know, the stuff like Skinamarink and Evil Dead Rise, where on TikTok, every single 13-year-old girl was like, this is the scariest movie ever made. Don't go see it. I feel like that's going to be the case with this Faces of Death one, and it's going to pull in a whole entire new fan base of Faces of Death who have no clue what the originals are, have no interest in what the originals are, and think that the originals are disgusting and gross. And that's what's going to happen, and it is going to cause a shitstorm. How do you defend yourself? You're just going to get called weird, you're just going to get called gross, you're going to get called a piece of shit for liking a movie that has real death in it. And sure, if you want to say that, say that. But at the end of the day, Faces of Death still has a massive cult following. It was one of the first sort of raved about underground movies where like, you have to see this movie. And then kids would find it, their parents would rent it, and they would watch it. Me. That was me. And you would go from there. So thank you for sticking around and watching me rant about Faces of Death for 20 minutes, but I just had to get it off my chest. Coming up soon for you guys, I will have some new videos, including 2 videos where I'm going to be watching some disturbing films I have not seen and going over each of them for you. Also, I plan on having some live streams at some point. I would really like to do this thing where I kind of rewatch some lesser known horror movies or movies that I haven't seen in a while and kind of like live stream that while I'm doing it to kind of be here with you guys. I plan on putting like a link to where you can find it in the chat so that way you guys can follow along. And that'll be a good old time to kind of watch some horror movies together every now and then. So, until then, this has been Basement Horrors. We'll be back soon with another horror video.